everyone, welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's get started with the big stories we're tracking on the show. The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to immediately halt its offensive in Rafah in southern Gaza. The World Court cited exceptionally grave developments for the already extremely vulnerable population in Rafah and said it was not convinced that the evacuation effort for civilians in Gaza are sufficient to alleviate the immense risk to Palestinians due to the offensive in Rafah. Israel, which has rejected the genocide charges, has previously described the case as being divorced from the facts. The ICJ ruling is part of a broader case brought by South Africa, accusing Israel of violating the Genocide Convention. South Africa had asked the court to order Israel to cease military operations in Gaza, arguing that the Israeli assault in Rafah is aimed at destroying the essential foundations of Palestinian life. However, it is important to remember that the International Court of Justice's ruling is not binding on any nation, and the World Court actually has no means or powers to implement its orders. Israel has from the very beginning been dismissive and extremely critical of the case brought to the court by South Africa and has given enough indications that it has no intention of abiding by the court's rulings. But let's not forget, at least 35,800 people have been killed and over 80,000 injured in Gaza since the war began, according to the Gazan Health Ministry, which does not distinguish between civilians and combatants, but says the majority of the dead were women and children.
The State of Israel shall, in conformity with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and in view of the worsening conditions of life faced by civilians in the Rafah governorate, by 13 votes to 2, immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that would bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. I shall not read the introductory paragraphs of the order. In the present circumstances, the court is also of the view that in order to preserve evidence related to allegations of acts falling within the scope of Article 2 and Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, Israel must take effective measures to ensure the unimpeded access to the Gaza Strip of any commission of inquiry, fact-finding mission, or other investigative body mandated by competent organs of the United Nations.
All right, let's get a word in from our guest, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, defense expert, joining us on Global Lens tonight. Sir, this is the big breaking news this evening. The International Court of Justice saying the humanitarian situation in Rafah has deteriorated further, and it is in fact now disastrous. It has asked Israel to immediately halt its Rafah offensive. Now, we all know, sir, that the World Court has no powers to implement its orders, and Israel has given enough indications that it really has no intentions of abiding by the ICJ's ruling. So my question to you is, in your assessment, what does this ruling really mean? Does it mean at least more international pressure on Israel?
Good evening. Yeah, indeed, what you said was absolutely right. It is to put pressure on Israel, because Israel, well, has already made it very clear that it is not going to stop until and unless it ensures that Hamas is totally disseminated. If that be the intentions of Israel, well, the International Court of Justice is in its own way right to be able to influence Israel. But slowly and steadily, Israel is losing all the goodwill that it has. There is no denying the fact that October 7th and subsequently whatever Hamas did was wrong. And even the retaliation by Israel was absolutely appropriate for whatever they did to Israel. But now like you rightly said, over 35,000 people dead, over 80,000 people are almost badly injured, millions of people just displaced, and almost 80% of Gaza is absolutely flattened. Now, the Rafah offensive, because Israel feels very strongly that all of them are taking human shield cover and insisting, that is why lots of these even relief agencies, relief work that are being interfered with by the Hamas. So all this is making Israel react very, very strongly. But international pressure is there, and there is no denying that it is this pressure which has prevented Israel so far, because they have been preparing for Rafah offensive. They have insisted that people shift to the north. In the north, they have prepared places for them to go and settle down there. Irrespective of that, lakhs of people have also moved in there. Despite that, the Rafah offensive hasn't gone, even though they've been saying that for over a fortnight, is indicated that there is a pressure in Israel. There's pressure from USA on Israel that it is enough is enough. Now let's not go it. And even when Hamas insists on talks, and those talks, well, whether it is now, even with the Iran president having passed away recently in a Hepta accident. So all these are indicators that there is a pressure which Israel probably wants to use it to their benefit, but the world insists that enough is enough. Now I think Israel has conveyed the message. Hamas, obviously, all of them, Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, will now understand, even though Putin's visit to these countries is also one indicator that, well, there is something which is happening on that side. So all this is there. Israel intends to have its offensive, but yes, world pressure on Israel is to now sort of not a total ceasefire, but control, not to go for a Rafah offensive, because that means a huge humanitarian crisis, because lakhs and lakhs of people who are there in a very, very small area might just be dying. As it is, there is huge crisis of food, health, everything. Most women, children are in terrible state. I think Israel may, I still feel ICJ and all the kinds of Israel's goodwill that it has earned so far, Israel would want to lose the goodwill, and at the same time will insist on pressure that Hamas does not, in any case now, Hamas does not sort of strike or use these relief convoys for their own logistic needs. So that's also what the Israelis are looking at. I think this is an international pressure on Israel to stop the Rafah offensive. Yeah.
Quite right, sir. The world is certainly trying to repeatedly send out the message to Israel that enough is enough. But unfortunately, Israel is in no mood to listen to anybody. Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, former Indian diplomat, is also with us. Let me get a quick reaction from him as well to this big development we've had this evening. Sir, the reaction to the International Court of Justice's ruling really are along predictable lines. The Palestinian Authority has said an international consensus to end Israel's war on Gaza is what we, is what this verdict actually represents, and they have welcomed it. Israel's finance minister has said those who demand that Israel stop the war are demanding that it should decide to cease to exist. Israel will not agree. Now, it is very clear. Israel has no intention of abiding by this ruling. The ICJ has no means of implementing its order. The question really is that this is an issue over which even Israel and its closest ally, the United States, seem to differ. How do you see this Rafah offensive panning out in the days ahead? Do you believe Netanyahu will go ahead with it, regardless of how even the United States and the Biden administration feel about it?
Well, Neha, I think there has been a certain amount of convergence in the views of the Netanyahu government and the United States, because Israel has, I think, pulled out some 900,000 Palestinians from that area, civilians. So I think the United States is quite happy with that. And so that, in a sense, indicates that Israel would probably go ahead with whatever they want in terms of cleaning up the remaining elements of militants, the Hamas militants. So the situation on the ground is that Israel is pretty much determined to go ahead. I mean, I accept that the judgment of the ICC brings a certain amount of moral pressure, but then certain countries, are able to get away because they think that there is no one stopping them. United States, which is the overwhelming power, superpower, is with Israel, and Israel thinks that it has effectively no check on what it wants to do. And Netanyahu is pretty much determined to get rid of Hamas as much as he can. So I really don't see what is stopping Netanyahu. I mean, these moral pressures will continue. They are good thing. International community should react. But that's not stopping Netanyahu.
Right, nothing is going to stop Netanyahu. The man seems determined to continue with his military offensive in Gaza, including in Rafah. And of course, the worry is it could be yet another catastrophe for the Palestinian people. All right, I need to take a break here on Global Lens. We've discussed the big breaking news of this evening. The International Court of Justice is ruling on Israel and the Gaza war. In the next segment, we're going to switch to our other big story of the day, China's so-called punishment drills around Taiwan. And to talk about that, I have with me on Global Lens tonight Dr. Tilak Jha, Associate Professor at Bennett University. He is a China expert. And of course, Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, former Indian diplomat, and Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, defense expert, will also continue being with us on the show. See you on the other side of this break.
I was ready to be a CEO at 26.
Only the guys with the strongest heads can handle hard situations.
There is a blurring line between arrogance and confidence.
This is the philosophy of FC Bayern Munich.
World premiere on 25th of May, only on News 9 Live.
Helps beat sensitivity fast. Sensodyne Rapid Relief.
हर पल मनाओ केसरी त्योहार विमल बोलो जुबान केसरी.
For the very first time in our investigation, we unmasked the killer of Ravindra Matre.
In 5G, we have to stand with the world, and in 6G, we have to lead the world.
Winning a Grammy was an absolutely surreal experience.
The game of power politics has begun. The poll bugle has been sounded. Who will receive the death blow? Who will be checkmated? It still remains to be seen.
ये दिखाता है हर कार्यकर्ता का बुलंद हौसला.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
I was ready to be a CEO at 26.
Only the guys with the strongest heads can handle hard situations.
There is a blurring line between arrogance and confidence.
This is the philosophy of FC Bayern Munich.
World premiere on 25th of May, only on News 9 Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. For 2 days now, China has conducted what it terms as punishment drills around Taiwan. These military drills involved joint operations of China's Army, Navy, Air Force and Rocket Force and have been conducted in the Taiwan Strait, a narrow body of water separating the island from mainland China as well as north, south and east of Taiwan. For the first time, the People's Liberation Army or PLA drills involved China's Coast Guard operating in areas around Taiwan's outlying islands located just off the southeastern coast of China. The PLA, which dwarfs Taipei's outgunned military, kicked off the exercises by sending warships and fighter jets around Taiwan and its outlying islands in what it called a strong punishment for separatist acts of Taiwan independence forces. Between 6 a.m. on Thursday and 6 a.m. on Friday, the Taiwanese Defense Ministry detected 49 Chinese aircraft, including 35 that crossed the median line, an informal demarcation point in the Taiwan Strait that Beijing does not recognize. A total of 19 Chinese warships and 7 Coast Guard vessels were detected near the Taiwan Strait. The People's Liberation Army says China's military drills around Taiwan are designed to test its ability to seize power over the island. The drills were the largest in more than a year and come just days after Taiwan swore in its new president Lai Ching-te, who is openly loathed by Beijing for championing the island's sovereignty and distinct identity. Ahead of Taiwan's elections in January, Beijing had warned that a Lai victory could inflame tensions and spark conflict, repeatedly framing the vote as a choice between peace and war. Beijing has denounced Lai as a dangerous separatist, troublemaker, war maker, and slammed his inauguration speech on Monday, during which he called on China to cease its intimidation of Taiwan, which has grown much more pronounced under Chinese President Xi Jinping. He also asked Beijing to respect the right of the Taiwanese people to decide their own destiny. 64-year-old Lai was once an open supporter of Taiwan independence, clearly a red line for Beijing. His views have tempered over the years, and now he says he favors the status quo and that there is no plan or need to declare independence since the island is already an independent sovereign country. China's ruling Communist Party views Taiwan as part of its territory despite never having controlled it and has vowed to take the island by force if necessary. The vast majority of Taiwanese people do not wish to live under Chinese rule. But Xi Jinping, China's most authoritarian leader in a generation, has made clear the island's inevitable reunification with the mainland cannot be put off indefinitely. Taiwan's defense ministry has condemned China's military exercises as irrational provocations and dispatched its own sea, air and ground forces in response. Taiwan's presidential office has said it's regrettable to see China threatening Taiwan's democracy, freedom, regional peace and stability with unilateral military provocations, adding that Taiwan has the confidence and ability to protect its national security. Taiwan's new president, Lai Ching-te, has had a politically turbulent start to his presidency after taking over from two-term leader Tsai Ing-wen to kick off a historic third consecutive term for the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. The PLA's drills posed the first real test for the president of Taiwan in managing tensions with Beijing, which has refused his offer to talk and to resume cross-strait tourism and student exchanges. In fact, China's defense ministry has accused Lai of pushing Taiwan into a dangerous situation of war and playing with fire. The ministry spokesperson said those who play with fire will burn themselves. Whenever Taiwan independence forces provoke us, we will push our countermeasures forward until the complete reunification of the motherland is achieved. Domestically, too, Lai is facing chaos in the legislature, where opposition parties that favor closer ties with China hold a majority and have pushed to subject his administration to tighter scrutiny. China's military drills are often as much about playing to a domestic audience as signaling intentions internationally. Now, some military experts say the PLA's exercises this time focused on practicing a new mode of blockading Taiwan. They point out that Taiwan is an isolated island, suspended in the sea with weak self-sufficiency. Taiwan's economy is export-oriented and most of its energy consumption relies on imports. Once besieged and blockaded, it can easily lead to economic collapse, turning it into a dead island. The exercises to the south of Taiwan are crucial for the blockade targeting Kaohsiung Port, Taiwan's largest port and an important base for the island's navy. Drills to the east of Taiwan are designed to practice cutting off the island's energy imports, the escape routes for Taiwan independence forces and the support line from the US and its allies. Analysts also say the China Coast Guard movement close to and around the outlying islands was an important new aspect of these drills. The pressing of Coast Guard and other forces into waters close to those offshore islands is provocative. Such Chinese activities could continue, with Beijing being able to turn an exercise into a real military operation at any point in time. Some say these drills actually blur the lines between war and peace, so much so that future exercises could be used as a pretext for an actual invasion. They also argue that these exercises are sending a bigger political message. Beijing will use the pressure of the drills to increase divisions within Taiwan, which could weaken the island from the inside. Taiwan is not recognized as an independent country by most governments around the world. Over the decades, it has become increasingly isolated, with a number of governments switching diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing. Having said that, unofficial diplomatic ties with many Western nations have been bolstered in recent years, in part thanks to China's saber-rattling. The United States is a very important player in the region, as it maintains close, though informal, relations with Taiwan and is bound by law to supply the island with weapons to defend itself. China cut official communication with Taiwan since the DPP took office in 2016 and has ramped up economic, military and diplomatic pressure on the island. At the same time, ties between Taipei and Washington have become more robust, with increased arms sales and high-level political engagement under Li's popular predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen. This has infuriated Beijing, spurring it to unleash more pressure on Taiwan and sending cross-strait relations on a downward spiral. The US formally switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing in 1979, but has long taken a delicate middle path. In what is known as the One China policy, Washington recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole legitimate government of China. It also acknowledges Beijing's position that Taiwan is part of China, but Washington has never accepted the Chinese Communist Party's claim of sovereignty over Taiwan. American lawmakers regularly visit the island and have supported legislation to bolster US support for Taiwan and its defensive capabilities. But it has historically remained deliberately vague on whether it would defend Taiwan in case of a Chinese invasion, a policy known as strategic ambiguity. After the election in January, the US sent a bipartisan delegation to Taiwan, where they met with Lai and his predecessor and promised that American support for Taiwan will continue no matter who wins the upcoming US presidential election. Beijing has announced sanctions against former US House Representative Mike Gahar, who led that delegation, citing his remarks and actions that interfere in China's internal affairs. The island has long been one of the most contentious issues in US-China relations, with Beijing condemning any perceived support from Washington for Taipei. In 2022, after a visit to Taiwan by US Speaker Nancy Pelosi, China responded with an unprecedented show of force, carrying out military exercises around Taiwan in retaliation. The question we're asking on Global Lens tonight is this: what exactly is China's motive behind carrying out these latest military drills around Taiwan? Is it yet another threat and show of its own military strength? Is it a message to Taiwan's new president and the island's ally, the United States? Or is it in fact a precursor and preparation for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan?
China's military started its second day of drills around Taiwan on Friday, aiming to test their ability to control key areas and punish Taiwan's president Lai Ching-te. The drills in the Taiwan Strait began 3 days after Lai took office. Taiwan's defense ministry on Friday published pictures of its F-16s, armed with live missiles, patrolling the skies. It also showed pictures of Chinese Coast Guard vessels and warships involved in the drills, without specifying where the images were taken. Taiwan has condemned China's actions, accusing Beijing of escalating tensions and undermining regional stability. China sees Taiwan as its territory and has never ruled out using force to take control. It calls Lai a separatist and condemned his inauguration speech when he appealed for an end to Beijing's threats and said that two sides are not subordinate to each other. In a Friday commentary, China's state newspaper says that Lai's recent actions will only accelerate the destruction of pro-independence forces in Taiwan.
So what should be read into these latest military drills? Let's put that question to our guests. We have with us Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, Dr. Tilak Jha and Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. Dr. Tilak Jha, let me begin with you. The question is very simple. Is this yet another threat by Beijing? Its show of military strength, a message to the new Taiwanese president, or indeed preparation for a full-scale invasion of Taiwan?
If we have to say it in one word, it's a mind game. The Chinese have used this as strategy time and again in many issues that they had with foreign countries. And I think there is no comparison between China and Russia. China is not Russia. So if it had to attack, it could have done it directly. But China's domestic situation is something that they have to be careful about it, one. Second thing is that they don't really want to get into the war. That's not the Chinese way of, if you see the Chinese strategy historically. They put a lot of weight on mind game. The Sun Tzu's war strategy, just like India's Chanakya is one of the military strategists. So that's where I think we need to put in the fact that it's a mind game that they're trying to do. Second thing we have to also understand is that China has increasingly separated its actions against Taiwan compared to the US. Recently, China and United States are getting into talks, and there is a new momentum possibly to fix the issues that were coming up in China and American ties. But that has not really affected China's decision to sort of take up this issue against Taiwan in a big way. You see the military drills, it's just 2 days after William Lai, the new president, gets in, it just gets on, I think, despite the fact that the talks with the US are also on. So that basically sort of arrangement, informal arrangement, that if the relationship with the US is on the upswing, then the Chinese will hold on against Taiwan. That is also seems to be on the way out now. And of course, I think, as you pointed out, Mr. Xi, the current Chinese leader, he is in his third term. That's something of an exception, because for the past past 2 decades or so, China got into a system where you had a 10-year sort of arrangement, one president, 2 terms. Now he is already on his third term. And of course, the kind of news that we hear from China is not very encouraging. He just might hang on. How to hang on? Basically by ramping up nationalism. And I think Taiwan happens to be one of the key strategy, one of the key agenda on which he is using this. So he has set his goals. He has said it repeatedly that by 2049, China would make Taiwan to be part of it. And of course, this drill is testing the balance. I think that is where the new strategy, I think in South China Sea, or for that matter, if you see it, the Chinese strategy against Philippines, Vietnam, everywhere they're playing the same strategy. Mm-hmm. They're trying to up the ante, but at the same time, they're not just taking it to war yet, but it may not be very far. I believe very interesting.
Okay, that's a very nuanced argument that's been made by Dr. Tilak Jha. Of course, Chinese aggression has been on the rise in the entire region towards many of its neighbors. India has been at the receiving end, especially since 2020. What do these military exercises really mean for Taiwan? That remains the million-dollar question. We need to take another quick break here on Global Lens. We'll continue this conversation with our other guests.
That ink is a semi-permanent dye called the indelible ink.
We are the sole manufacturer of this indelible ink.
Don't try to repair something which is working.
And if you have facial recognition, you can go vote in any booth anywhere based on where you are, and then it will be recorded that you can't vote anywhere else again.
Can we retire indelible ink and use biometrics? Theoretically, my answer would be yes.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
I was ready to be a CEO at 26.
Only the guys with the strongest heads can handle hard situations.
There is a blurring line between arrogance and confidence.
This is the philosophy of FC Bayern Munich.
World premiere on 25th of May, only on News 9 Live.
Forever there are simultaneous election of parliament, assembly and municipality and panchayat. So that framework has to be given in the constitution. That amendment has been suggested.
Are you going to take away the power of dissolution?
I mean, it doesn't require any rocket science to do this. It's a simple constitutional amendment, and the idea is everything goes together.
The Law Commission has set the ball rolling for one nation, one election. Basically, if all goes well, then India may see simultaneous elections to Lok Sabha, state assemblies, municipalities and panchayats in 2029.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है मनी 9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing the latest tensions between China and Taiwan. Let me go straight across to Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, and I'd like to thank all our guests for their patience. General Kulkarni, for a long time now, President Xi Jinping has said repeatedly and publicly that a reunification of the Taiwanese island with mainland China is inevitable and cannot be put off indefinitely. It certainly seems to be one of the centerpieces of his agenda. How do you therefore view the latest so-called punishment drills that are being conducted around Taiwan? Is this mere psychological warfare, or, as some are suggesting, perhaps a precursor to a full-scale invasion?
Neha, Chinese believe in the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without a fight. That's what the Chinese believe in. The Chinese have all along, yes, just not Xi Jinping, you'll be surprised, the island of Kinmen, which is now being addressed by the Chinese in this particular drill, which they had not addressed it for a long time. During Mao Zedong's time, ever since the first visit of the United States president to Taiwan Island, they had that policy called odd and even. They continuously shelled the Kinmen Island for years on. Even after Mao's death, it was carrying on, almost for 3 years after Mao's death. So they have been continuously harassing, trying to dominate the Taiwanese for a very simple reason that they so feel that even after the Kuomintang regime and even when the Japanese surrendered, and since then, whatever it is, that they have not had a foothold on Taiwan. Having said this, the Chinese firmly believe that even their hold in the South China Sea would increase. Now, the median line that they talk about, 24 nautical miles from the Taiwanese coast, and time and again they keep crossing it. It's not easy. It is what you're saying, psychological, propaganda, more of a pressure tactic, because all these aircraft, maybe 33 of these aircraft, some saying more, maybe 15 of these warships, maybe 16 of these coast guards, all of these aircraft with live ammunition, but definitely not firing on each other. The exercises this time a little less scaled down to what it was last time in 22 when Nancy Pelosi visited. So all these kind of things. Yes, Chinese want to show and firmly believe, and what Xi Jinping has said, that yes, China is what he feels the center of the universe. He has promised the Chinese that they would surpass the American standard of living. They would surpass the Americans. They would be the #1 power, just not in Asia, but the entire world. This is the promise for which he has extracted and sort of a commitment from the Chinese that they would not insist on democratic rights, human rights. They would get a better standard of living, and for which he promises them that they will get what he believes the Chinese at the center of the universe. All these propaganda, all these feelings, and yes, and China also time and again want to gauge the reactions, whether when the Chinese are on to with the Philippines on a dispute on the South China Sea, they see how the American ships come. They know what is going on. It is not easy for China to cross the Taiwanese Strait because you require the number of boots on ground. Where are they going to come from? Obviously, when the ships leave the Chinese coast and moving towards the Taiwanese coast, an attack is seen that yes, the Chinese are sincerely quick, and in that hours it is going to take them to reach the Taiwanese coast. All of them will be sunk, whether by the Americans, and right now, the way the Americans have equipped the Taiwanese themselves are very confident, irrespective of what it is, that their own air defense measures, their own surface-to-air missiles, all of it are in place. It's not that easy. Chinese know that. Just on the lighter side, Neha, I must tell you, over 10 million tourists that you were mentioning, lots of them, the trade, the chips that are made, the chip war with the Chinese are most of them dependent on Taiwan. Do you know the number of marriages that are taking place, cross-strait marriages that take place? The Taiwanese girls know, the Chinese mainland girls know that the standard of living of the Taiwanese is almost $45,000. Their own is not even $10,000. And after one child principle, most of the Chinese girls, the mainland girls, want to marry the Taiwanese boys. And thousands of weddings have taken place over the years. Do you think that when there is such kind of relationship between the Taiwan island and the mainland China, that the Chinese would do? This is all propaganda, a pressure tactic. As I said, the supreme art of war, subdue the enemy without a fight. If the Taiwanese fought, you find change in Taiwanese also. They call themselves Taiwanese Chinese. The Taiwanese also have changed over a period of time. They don't call themselves Taiwanese. They call themselves Taiwanese Chinese. Their participation in sports, various activities that are taking place. So Xi Jinping, yes, in his own way, as he seems to feel that this is his opportunity, this is what he must do. He is intending to show to the world that he has now all the military power, obviously with a kind of $17 to $19 trillion economy that the Chinese have. They can afford to have, they can have to do it, but they will never do it on Taiwan. That's my personal reading. All this will happen. Obviously, they have all, as I said, marriages have taken place. The relations between the Taiwanese, they speak the same. They are from the same Hans. They speak Mandarin. So there's nothing that is distinguishes. So this is a pressure tactic, and they stand to benefit. They stand to benefit. Let me tell you, the Taiwanese speak good English. The Chinese mainland hardly can speak English. You try and speak to a Chinese, you will take 15 minutes to understand what exactly he's wanting to say. The Taiwanese speak reasonably good English. So they all understand that the amount of Taiwanese that are there in America, the kind of American, even from Taiwan, the top technology that comes from America to Taiwan can easily be transported to China without any fail, because they speak the same language, they know what's going on and everywhere. So all this are tactics just to ensure that the Chinese are there, they can do it, and let's not talk about separatism. Do not let. It is primarily to keep the US away and enabling the Taiwanese to tell them, look, don't look. What are they doing with India? The same, that do not be a part of Quad, do not be a part of anything, don't be closer to the Americans. It is we who matter. That is it. So I think it is more of a propaganda and more of a pressure tactics that the Americans with the mainland China, the PLA for the Eastern Command of theirs, the Eastern Theater Command of theirs, which is doing it. But I do not visualize China would ever do it, because they are blood relatives and they would never want to do. I feel that is my strong feeling, they will not do it.
Very interesting, though. You know, I'm reminded of how there are blood relatives across the border between India and Pakistan as well. But we fought 3 wars. And I must say that I'm sure Xi Jinping is not amused by those cross-strait marriages that you referred to. But very interesting. Lieutenant General Kulkarni is quite convinced that this is nothing more than psychological warfare and pressure tactics, that China does not actually intend to go ahead and launch a full-scale invasion of Taiwan. Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, let me put this question to you. How do you think the United States would be viewing these drills? Because as much as it is a message to Taiwan's new leadership, it's clearly a message to Taiwan's ally, the United States, as well. And Dr. Jha earlier made an interesting point, you know, how much tensions between Taiwan and China worsen in the days ahead could very well depend on US-China ties. We've seen, you know, ties between these two superpowers nosedive in recent times, but in recent months there have also been efforts to, in a sense, stabilize the relationship. Do you believe the US in that sense will remain a big factor as far as China's decisions on Taiwan are concerned? Sir, you'll have to unmute yourself. Sir, if you could just try and unmute yourself. Okay, I'm not sure if Ambassador Gupta can hear me. Therefore, let me go across to Dr. Jha at this point. Dr. Jha, I'd like to put the same question to you. How big is the US factor in determining how much Taiwan-China relations worsen in the days ahead?
Well, for that matter, I think we all should understand that for China, one country that really matters is America, the United States. It's as much a mind game against the US as much as Taiwan. Taiwan, to my understanding, the Chinese don't even take very seriously. They understand the kind of disparities that exist between China and Taiwan. The Chinese, for that matter, if they really wanted it, I think this was the question during the 1950s and 60s as well, when Mao was still the chairman. I think there have been very few, there have been possibly only leader of the status of Mao. So even he chose, for that matter, to let Taiwan the way it was, to make sure that China gets on with the rest of the world first before taking over Taiwan. So to my understanding, I think recent examples are testimony to this. What China did in Hong Kong, I mean, what does it say? Everybody said one country, two systems. The Chinese promised one country, two systems. And within 2 decades, they were back in full swing. And they kept on saying that it's one country, two systems. Economically, yes, there is still Hong Kong dollar. Economically, yes, there is still Hong Kong share market. But for all practical purpose, the one country, two system that used to be for the Hong Kongers, that has vanished. So yeah, I think, see, if for that matter, Taiwan and Hong Kong dynamics and one country, two system precepts that China talks about, they have already threatened the Taiwanese that, you see, we are not really going to just back off. This military thing is primarily against the US. We were just talking about before this show, before this China thing began, about Israel's situation. There is military situation in Ukraine where US is fairly tied to a great deal, offering billions of dollars. There is a situation in almost several parts of primarily these two, you know. And China does know that US hands are tied. There is election coming in the US. American politics is fairly divided, and the more the pressure on American economy, the more there will be reluctance to support anything what Mr. Biden said, that they will be open to take up on China if need be. But the Chinese know very, very well that their political system doesn't allow the kind of flexibility that is there in China. So China knows this thing, and I think all it takes is a few years of economic recession in the US, and the Chinese know that their moment will come. So, and I think there will be no there's no public support in the US. Thereafter, there will be little appetite. Why Mr. Trump is coming back into the US, among others, is because of the US-wide commitment all across the world. Mr. Trump, who could very likely be the next president, and I think he was already there, has basically removed American role in NATO and its security structure, Americans' role has been on the back foot. And we see pressure has already come in America. It's quite a bit linked to economy. There is a less appetite in America for geopolitics, and that's getting lesser by the day. So what we see is essentially a mind game, but it's really interesting. I think what we observe essentially is that there is every next country, including India as well, is trying to sort of get into a real geopolitics of sorts. And of course, we have good relations. India has a good relationship with America. And I think that is also seen as some sort of balancing against China. At least that's Americans see that way, even if we don't. But we have seen in recent years that this strategy does seem to be putting China in a corner. If that really works out, if the Chinese economy comes under pressure, I believe that's the American strategy. But that's a similar strategy that the Chinese are also trying to. And I think the Chinese support for Russia in Ukraine, without actually getting into anything substantial, is also similar strategies. They're trying to, in a way, it appears indirectly that they're trying to get Russia fight China's war, essentially. So Taiwan is not going to be that case because Taiwan is a developed country, as the former speaker pointed out. They have a great relationship. But all you need, there are already 12 allies, Taiwan has all but 12 allies. It all takes US support. It's only the US support which is crucial. They all just need to take that thing, and thereafter the chips will fall apart. So,
okay.
That's how
I do agree with you. Many Western countries, especially the United States, now do see India as a countervailing force against China in the Indo-Pacific, which is what some say explains the growing ties between India and the United States. The fact that we made some historic defense deals last year with the United States, with that country agreeing for the first time to even transfer sensitive technology to India, something it had never done before. Clearly, there is that China factor that is at play. We know how irked China has been with Quad, for instance. So let me now take this back to Ambassador Yogesh Gupta. I hope we have a more stable line with him now. Ambassador Gupta, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni says this is nothing but psychological warfare and pressure tactics. After all, China has a long history of intimidating and threatening Taiwan, but it will not go so far as to launch a full-scale invasion of the island. Dr. Tilak Jha says this is more a message to the United States than to Taiwan. What is your view, sir, on what is happening currently? How big do you think is the US factor in all of this? And as Dr. Jha said earlier, do you agree that where US-China relations go from here could very well determine China's next moves vis-a-vis Taiwan?
Well, they have, my thinking is more closer to that of General Kulkarni. It is certainly a pressure tactic because the new president of Taiwan had used had shown some instincts for what the Chinese call independence. He had used certain language, certain terms in his inaugural speech, conveying a certain sense of maintaining Taiwan's independence, its status as a sovereign country, and so on, which were obviously not to China's liking. So, if any country in China's neighborhood does something which is against China's liking, then China always reacts in some way or the other. And so we have all these exercises. Yes, United States will always remain an important factor, not only in China's relations with Taiwan, but in China's relations with most of the countries in its neighborhood. Because China will always gauge how the United States will react, whether it will intervene, and if it does so, in what manner, whether it will intervene directly or indirectly. So the United States has always been and will always remain a very important factor in whatever China does in its neighborhood. Third point is that Chinese economy is not doing well. And so at this time, for China to undertake any military action is, I think, not logical, because it will have a huge economic consequences. China is not Russia. Russia has huge sources of oil, gas, and minerals, food, and so on. China is dependent on for all these things on other countries. So China's economic situation is very different from that of Russia. So taking all these factors together, also we have to see the domestic situation. Xi Jinping can't afford to appear weak at home because of economy. He is already on a difficult wicket at home. So if he allows the United States to gain some sort of a dominant or predominant hand in the situation in its immediate vicinity, then it becomes difficult for him to explain at home his actions, particularly when he has sought a third exceptional term as General Secretary of the party and as the president. So Xi Jinping has to react. But I think it is more in terms of conveying disapproval of what this new Taiwanese president has done, mounting more pressure on him to curb his instincts for independence. The war is not likely in the immediate future, but it can't be ruled out. The effort on both sides, that is China and the United States, is to boost their deterrence, to convey a sense of deterrence. Everyone wants the status quo to continue in Taiwan. As long as we are able to convey a certain deterrence, then we will be able to maintain peace.
All right, everybody wants status quo. Even China would not want war, and China is not Russia. Very interesting. Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, some military experts have pointed out that these exercises being carried out by the PLA could actually be, practicing a new mode of blockading Taiwan. They say Taiwan's economy, is export-oriented. It is an isolated island, suspended in the sea with weak self-sufficiency, and most of Taiwan's energy consumption relies on imports. If you besiege it and blockade it, that can lead to an economic collapse of that country, or rather, self-governed island. How do you look at that?
Neha, let's look at it from the Chinese point of view. The Chinese themselves have a manufacturing economy. They're totally dependent on the world and so much on Europe. Imagine the kind of sanctions if America and the Europeans were to do, which they've already started doing, and you see the kind of reaction that is happening there. Xi Jinping has promised the Chinese to a certain level. And that level today at $17 trillion with just about 10,000 US dollars as a per capita income, China stands nowhere with these countries. Where it intends to compete with these countries, it stands nowhere. China understands its limitations, that yes, with the kind of population, the kind of reaction that the world would have, its own dependence on manufacturing and exporting and selling goods by itself. China stolen technology, everything stealing, then improvising, then doing it. China is not always in the front foot, though Chinese would want to show that they are on the front foot, but they are not on the front foot. And they wish to gauge. They want to see if $100 billion that US has been willing to invest in Ukraine, over $20 billion US has invested in Israel. Now you know the kind of economy, the kind out of the 10 top world manufacturers of weapons, 8 of them are Americans. Look at it. Where does China stand? Chinese are always doing these exercises with a view to show that they have the technology, they have it in them. The third aircraft carrier will come, they will sail, they will ensure the South China Sea is there, the backyards, nobody can come there. All that is, trying to show more than they have, trying to bite more than they can chew. So all these kind of things are bound to happen, but yet China cannot be taken for granted. Chinese can't be trusted. China can do anything at a time when it can be least expected. So, but China is one thing worried also of its reputation. China cannot afford to go into war with either India or Taiwan or with Japan, or they try to throw its weight in South China Sea and get blocked by the Philippines, because should there be a defeat, even should there be a defeat, they know what happened to them in Vietnam. So they are all aware. The only war that they won is 1962 in the entire history. The Chinese have lost every war. They know that the Chinese are not capable, and therefore all this has to be orchestrated. He has to keep his flock together. He has to raise their morale. He has to ensure that the Chinese are the best. The COVID times, they know the kind of reputations that the Chinese have got into the entire world. Everybody is looking at China, that they are the root cause of the COVID that has happened.
Also, the focus right now really seems to be more on, an economic rivalry between China and the United States. Therefore, you're saying that China really does not have an appetite for another war at this point, nor does it really intend to carry out an economic blockade of Taiwan. As we wrap up this discussion, I want to put one question very quickly to my guest, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni. If President Biden loses the upcoming presidential election in the United States and Trump comes into the White House, could that significantly alter America's Taiwan policy?
Obviously, because what would happen is Trump has all along been telling the NATO countries, look, spend at least 4% of your GDP on your defense. You're entirely dependent on America for everything that you do. So he will insist. That is where Germans and the Americans have got into this problem. Everybody, he's been insisting, spend 4% of your GDP. You can't just spend 1% of your GDP and enjoy the prosperity at the cost of America. So similarly, Taiwan and all these, everybody wants to take on to the kind of, everybody must join in. That is why you find Squad coming in. You have Quad coming in. That means everybody must work together to ensure interoperability. And if they are intent putting pressure on China, Trump's coming itself is almost like if China or Taiwan wants war avoidance, if each one of them are trying to show deterrence, then it's indicative that Trump's arrival as the next president, if that be so, is indeed quite a signal to China that please lay off. These kind of tactics will not work, and it is better to cooperate and move along with the world and not just be able to show that you do all these kind of tactics and punish people, trying to punish people, countries. That is not done. I think, yes, Chinese are on the back foot if Trump comes on the scene.
Okay, so Chinese will be on the back foot, but Dr. Jha, very quickly, Trump is unpredictable and he's transactional. So my question is, can Taiwan take bipartisan support from the United States for granted? While, a bipartisan delegation definitely visited Taiwan in the month of January this year, but could Trump coming into the White House change things for Taiwan?
Well, there is very much bipartisan support in the US for anything against China. So that is there, but I think we have to just understand that all the trade war that we were talking about between China and the US, it was never about trade. It was about technology, as you pointed out. So it's actually technology which is in the contest. The China and the US have been trying to cut off each other from supremacy of the tech regime, and sort of getting upper hand. With Trump coming back, I think we very well may see that there'll be more talk, but I think on the ground, substantial actions will remain the same. The momentum will remain in sort of fact that, well, China and America will keep on going apart. And I think that's where the tech regime is heading. So the whole debate is about technology, whether Trump comes or whether Mr. Biden remains.
So in that sense, we're likely to see continuity of policy, at least as far as America-China ties go. I'm completely out of time, but it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, gentlemen. On that note, Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, Dr. Tilak Jha and Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, that's all the time we have on this edition. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time on Monday. Have a great weekend ahead.
Forever, there are simultaneous election of Parliament, Assembly, and municipality and panchayat. So that framework has to be given in the constitution. That amendment has been suggested.
Are you going to take away the power of dissolution?
I mean, it doesn't require any rocket science to do this. It's a simple constitutional amendment.